Hello. This is for Chapter 2 of our ethics reading for this week. This video is called 3 Views of Ethics. Alright, so our text outlines 3 different views of ethics. So the first is Objectivism. This is the view that there's only one universal moral standard, and that standard's based on objective moral facts and consists of moral values and principles that hold universally for all people and all societies. The other view is popular relativism. This is the view that there can be different moral standards for different societies. Each standard is based on that society's moral beliefs and practices, and it constitutes the moral values and principles that hold for all members of that particular society. The third and final view is what's called subjectivism. This is the view that there can be different moral standards for different people in the same society. So each person's standard is based on that person's moral beliefs and practices at a given time, and consists of the moral values and principles that hold for that person at that time. So notice that how these 3 views work together. Objectivism is the view that there are moral standards that apply to everyone equally. Relativism is the view that there are moral standards, but that these standards are indexed to particular societies, and they change depending on the society. And then subjectivism, the view that we each have our own personal moral standards. Okay, so to go a little bit more in depth into what these views are talking about. So note that none of them are talking about principles from other normative realms. So for example, they're not talking about law or etiquette, which unquestionably vary across societies. Instead, each is talking exclusively about moral principles and values. They're also not concerned with the rich diversity in institutions, dress, religious beliefs, and other non-normative values that distinguish particular cultures from each other. In addition, another important thing to notice, and this is very important, is that these 3 views are completely distinct. This is to say that each rules out the other. So what this means for us is that you can only hold one of the 3 views at a time. So you can either hold objectivism, relativism, or subjectivism. You can't hold a combination of the 2 or a mixture of them. You have to only hold one. And sort of a last point, these views are meta-ethical, which is to say that none of them take a stand on what's actually right and wrong, but instead they're talking about ethics itself. This is what it means for something to be meta-ethical. Okay, now I'm going to cover each of them in a little bit more depth. First, objectivism. This is the view that there's only one valid moral standard that holds for all human beings. So there's one universal moral standard regardless of what anyone believes or practices. Now notice that objectivism does not mean that people must all act exactly the same, no matter what the circumstances are at a particular time. So the same moral principles can lead to different obligations in different situations. So, one example of how this might work is the example of lying to save someone's life. We're going to see this when we turn to the next chapter. But imagine that you have a principle that says that you shouldn't lie. Okay, that's a fairly common principle. And then imagine you have another principle that says that life is important. So then imagine that you're hiding someone from soldiers, and then the soldiers come to your door looking for that person. Now you hold the principle that lying is wrong, but you also hold the principle that life is valuable. So perhaps you lie to the soldiers in order to save the person's life who's hiding in your house. So objectivism is binding upon all, but it need not be morally rigid. So this is to say that it can still adjust to particular circumstances. And we'll see how this can happen in the next chapter. Now, to say a little bit more about relativism, which was also called popular relativism. Popular moral relativism devised the universality of moral standards. Instead, it maintains that there can be different but equally valid moral standards for different cultures or social groups. It does insist, however, that all who belong to a given group are bound to the group's moral standard, whether or not they agree with its values and principles. So, what actually is right for everyone in that society is what the majority of that society accepts as right. Okay? Now, subjectivism. Subjectivism is the view that maintains that there can be different but equally valid moral standards for different people, even within the same society. So, there's no guarantee that the moral standards for any two people will match, nor is there any guarantee that a person's present moral principles will be the same a year from now. Subjectivism makes moral standards entirely dependent on each individual at a particular time. All right, so a few questions to consider. How much are your moral beliefs the product of your culture and society? Which views in particular do you identify as the following from your culture and your society? Do you agree with any particular moral belief or practice? Do you disagree with any particular moral belief or practice that's widely accepted by your society? Now, the third question. Are you more drawn to moral objectivism, relativism, or subjectivism? And then explain why.